Welcome back. This is the second half of our newspaper review on K24 this morning. Welcome if you're just joining us. And don't forget, we have the last part of our K24 Crystal Ball. Today it's all about matters economy. We spoke to Dr. Jim McPhee of Strathmore University. That's coming up in a bit. But right now, we're talking about, Sagana. Where do we go from here and the Sagana effect? And also a judiciary that seems like it's at a crossroads at this particular point in time of its leadership. That discussion taking place in studio. We have Arnold Maleba, Joy Mdivo, and Dana Church as well. Of course, the natural place to start this conversation would be from Joy. You know, you've been there, you sat with the seats, you've been on the bench. For Kenyans who are trying to understand what's going on at this point, do we have a CJ? Do we not? What happens from here? They're just trying to get their minds around it, because even when you follow the conversation on Twitter, your learned friends just throwing a lot of Latin in there, and some people wonder, okay, fine. So where do we go from here? Okay,
so let me just break it down. We do have a deputy CJ. So Honorable Philomena Mwilu remains our deputy CJ. That is not the problem. The problem is the application that was made in Meru sought to stop her from acting as a Chief Justice, and it sought to keep her from taking up some of her duties. Let me just try and put it in another way. I think Peter Wanyama is one who put it more succinctly. It's like what we did with the governors, that you're still a governor, but don't access your office while we are sorting this out. Once we are done sorting this out, then you can resume. That's what the effect of the ruling did. So we do have somebody in office, only she cannot act substantively in that office because of the 2-3 things that she has facing her. But suffice it to say, this, like you said, this weekend has been twanga with this particular ruling. The thing that I find saddest with this thing is that it's not just predicated on what's happening with the Deputy Chief Justice, but it's something that we have seen of the judiciary of late. Not of late, of the last few years. We have a new constitution that is still new to most of us, to all of us, but to those who are entrusted with interpreting the constitution, the times when the letter of the law is not very clear, we have chosen to rely on this hocus-pocus thing called the spirit of the Constitution. Why I'm saying it's hocus-pocus is because it's neither here nor there. Right. For lawyers, you know, you read the text and you tell people this is what the text means. But the times when our judges have chosen to read the mind or the mood or the intention of the people who are trying to write it. Now, one of the biggest criticisms I've had of our Constitution is that it tried to be the Grundnorm and to be the enabling statute rolled in one. So what happens is, if you don't find something specifically in the Constitution and it doesn't exist anywhere else in our legislation, then you decide, you know what, here we can try and make up something as we go along. And so we've had several cases that have been decided in our courts that have taken this very flexible approach to justice. Now, before, you'd cry about it, but you know, you don't make too much noise. But when it comes to what's happening in the person of the Chief Justice, it shows you that, you know what, because it was judiciary and judiciary, I guess it was very stark. Because you have an officer who's effectively giving an injunction against another officer from doing a job that is a constitutionally mandated job. It doesn't make any sense. It's not even good law. But at the end of the day, one of the things that now made me stand down was the fact that, you know what, we have so many cases where this has happened. Even Judge Mwilu herself used the courts to stop the Judicial Service Commission from investigating her, forming a tribunal to investigate her. So she used the courts to stop a constitutional commission from doing its job.
So the precedent has been set.
Not just the precedent has been set. This culture is something that we need to hit the pause button as lawyers, as practitioners, as jurists, and just go back and sit down and say, you know what are we trying to do? Because at the end of the day, what will happen is that any time the executive doesn't like something that the legislature is doing, they'll go get an injunction and tell them, you know what, pause, stop doing that. The legislature has been very robust in resisting that, saying, you know what, you cannot interfere with us with your silly court orders. But what we are seeing now is that that fence is certainly being pushed back. Okay. And right now what has happened in the judiciary, as far as I'm concerned, is like very bad law. But as Arnold will tell you, and as our church will tell you, it is bad law, but it is still law until a court of equal or higher jurisdiction decides otherwise. So for now, Judge Mwilu is earning a salary, but she pretty much cannot do anything that the law tells us she should be able to do.
Church, I'll come to you on this one, because some people are saying it's a case where we are seeing officers of the court and lawyers just behaving badly from the LSK meeting that we saw take place and now to the corridors of justice. And people are saying, okay, fine, we need to just take a pause and assess the people who are, bestowing these particular responsibilities in a church. I'll come to you. I can see Joy laughing.
Leave but let the me come SGM to you out of this.
Where do you go from here as far as, how do you see this playing out as we move forward? Because it seems like it's in an entirely different theater, a bit of politics into what's going on with DCJ Mwilu. How do you see this panning out eventually?
Thank you. Of course, I agree with Joy that this is really unfortunate, and I think this is bad law. It's bad precedents that we're setting. Of course, given the fact that you see what happened when the application was filed before the judge, the orders, from what I've read, were actually given ex parte by the judge. And so when you're sitting in chambers and giving orders, stopping another judicial officer from carrying out what is otherwise a constitutional responsibility, then I think the kind of precedents that we are setting is very bad and very dangerous for this country. Now, the law is that once a valid court order is given, it has to be obeyed. And so as we speak today, the order is in force. And unless perhaps somebody moves to the Court of Appeal and sets it aside, Justice Mwilu can only sit in office, as Joy puts it, and earn salary. And that order stands. For me, I think this has a lot to do with the politics in the judiciary. The Judicial Service Commission is in the process of recruiting a new Chief Justice. And this started before even Maraga left his office. You remember there was an attempt to start the recruitment process before when he was still in the office. Then somewhere along the way it was scuttled. The law leaves a lacuna that the interpretation was that unless and until the CJ leaves his seat, then a recruitment process cannot start. And so here we are. The CJ has already left the office. The DCJ is acting, and now we have an order that basically stops the DCJ from performing the functions of the Chief Justice. And so essentially the effect of that order is that we do not have a Chief Justice who can perform the functions of the Chief Justice. And what does that tell you now when it comes to the functions of the Judicial Service Commission? Will the Judicial Service Commission sit in the absence of a Chief Justice to do the recruitment for the Chief Justice? And so all this, for me, plays out the politics of succession for the Chief Justice.
Arnold, I'll come to you on this one because as we look at how this CJ will be recruited, and the funny conundrum that everybody is saying we're in right now with what has just happened as of last week, how do you go from here? Because at the end of the day, this spot needs to be filled. Some people have said this is exactly what the executive needed in order to move forward. Do you think?
Well, if there is anywhere where the law of cause and effect applies strongly, is normally in politics. Anything you see happening out there has been made to happen. There's nothing spontaneous in politics, and especially in the bigger spectrum that is public administration. Where gaps are, they're exploited to ensure that some of these things happen. The president speaking in Sagana yesterday said that he's looking at, one of those things BBI is looking at is to do institutional strength, what he calls institutional change. Of course, he's been known for institutional change and swapping them and overwriting them. But really what we need as a country is institutional strengthening. So in one of those areas you realize that we really have played games with is actually the judiciary. So there's been a little bit of a lot of constitutional, legal and statutory creativeness, especially around the administrative laws and space. You look at how we have dealt with governors and people who are supposed to step aside, and then it came back calling. So mischief is actually home and dry. So how do we move forward? I will actually answer it as a practicing politician and tell you one thing, that in a patriarchal society like ours, probably we already have got in mind that we need a female CJ, or we already have identified. No, in this country we decide that, Jeff, you are going to be so-and-so, and then we work things backwards. We even play around with the policy in the same way, that we want to do this thing. Of course, we know we are going to get out something, and then we work backwards and then justify to people why we need that, even in policy. So sometimes it might not look smart to have a female CJ and a full CJ. If it were men in a patriarchal society like ours, it's quite okay. People really don't feel so much about it. So that would be one way of looking at it politically. That if we are looking at having a CJ who is a lady, then it's only fair to balance out by ensuring that we have got a deputy who is male. That's one way of looking at it. Two, I am hoping that, I know that even the Court of Appeal will struggle to try and play games with this. I don't know how far this can get. And without the DCJ in this, if it were to get to the Supreme Court, Joy probably will tell us exactly how that then plays out. If there will be quorum in the first place because she has to, she can't sit in that particular matter. So already a precedent has already been set. We've played around. And of course, when it was about Waititu, we all clapped because we weren't Waititu, and probably the judiciary thought they were not governors. When it was about Sonko, they did the same thing. So even as we play around and we get around this, probably the only time we're going to get serious about administrative justice is when MPs start being sent home. That is the day they will wake up. Otherwise, the impeachment procedure bill of 2018 should have been passed a long time ago. Probably take care of some of these gaps that do exist.
But allow me to build on what my brothers have said. Today you have a very eminent panel. Allow me to say, to build on what my brothers have said. One of the things we need to remember is that the Judicial Service Commission is already properly constituted. They have a deputy, an able deputy, Commissioner Deche, who, in the absence of Justice Maraga, she is substantively acting as the head of the Judicial Service Commission. So if we need to proceed with recruiting a Chief Justice, that matter, as far as the JSC is concerned, that is firmly, that is sorted. It's sorted by the law, and is sorted even by the membership.
So the ruling doesn't affect the process of getting the next
No, what it does do, it does bar Judge Mwilu from sitting in the JSC as acting CJ to participate in the process. And I think that was a big idea. With whoever this is, it is interesting too. That is one of the things we're looking at. So she cannot participate in the process ostensibly as an acting CJ. On the other hand, where Arnold left off about the quorum in the Supreme Court, you will realize that there have been several challenges to the BBI that have ended up in the Supreme Court. By Judge Mwilu being unable to sit as a Supreme Court judge, it means that the panel is not substantive enough to be able to handle matters, because you need at least 5. With the absence of CJ Maraga, with the absence of Judge Ojwang, that means you have 5. So one out of the way, then it means the Supreme Court cannot sit. Politically, like Arnold said, politically that is expedient for the moment, because like I said earlier, BBI train has left the station, left a few weeks back, but now this is when it is sort of in cruise mode now. And so all those challenges were going to be stick in the mud for the process. So with Judge Mwilu out of the way, you sufficiently take care of that. But let's go to Judge Mwilu herself. If when the first allegations were leveled against her, she had allowed the process to take its course, it was obvious to any observer that Judge Maraga was ready to stand by her. Maybe not defend improprieties, but was going to ensure that whatever is happening to his deputy was going to happen strictly as per the law. It is very well within the realms of possibility that she could have had the criminal proceedings done and dusted, or even if she blocked those, she could have had the tribunal had determined and finished the matter and cleared her name, so that right now should be eligible for even being on the race as a candidate for deputy for Chief Justice. But because she chose this tactic of keeping everything in abeyance, then it means none of these issues are cleared. So she's in a situation where her own strategy worked too well, where it did buy her the extra 2 years where she was undisturbed, but now that has formed the basis to question her character and her integrity to the level that, you know what, we have not yet gotten to a place where we've determined whether or not you're guilty, but with this sword of Damocles hanging over your head, we are not touching you in this particular space. So I think she's left with one of 2 options. Either she can look at this situation and say, you know what, it's too murky, and she goes ahead and steps down, or maybe this might be the time to face her demons and say, you know what, now bring it on, let's sort this out. But whichever she chooses right now, as far as her career progression goes, acting CJ, I think, is the farthest she's going to go, because with the way the stars are aligned, by the time it's her turn again, she'll be over the age of 70. And so I think her strategy worked too well. Such that she stayed in office, but it's boomeranged back, and her own actions and inactions have been, the same strategies have been used against her. And now she's, I guess, drinking of her own cup.
Okay, we'll wait and see how this one plays out, of course, even as it goes back to those very corridors of justice. But also, this is where we draw curtains as far as a newspaper review is concerned at this particular point in time. Arnold Maliba, thank you so much for your time this morning. Asante sana. Joy Mdivo, thank you so much for making time to be on the show, as always. And Dana Church, many thanks for being on the show this morning. Asante sana. Like we told you, we're winding up our series today, and it's all about the economy. Now, one of the biggest casualties of the COVID-19 pandemic were economies. Lack of trade or movement of people, business and transactions as well, led many economies to recession or very close to that point. What is the economic impact of COVID-19 on the Kenyan economy? Does the Kenyan economy experience an upswing in 2021? And why would the onset of the Free Continental Trade Agreement be a disadvantage to us in the country? It is all about exports, balance of trade, and public debt when I spoke to Dr. Jim McPhee, Director of the School of Accountancy at the Strathmore University, as he gazed into the K24 crystal ball. Afternoon, Dr. McPhee.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for making time to be the K24 crystal ball. And like we said, we're just painting a picture, looking at scenarios for the year 2021, and then, God willing, in December, we shall be back on this bench, looking at what we discussed and ticking the boxes and saying, this worked, well, this, probably no one could have seen this happening, and just look back on how the year, just pans out. I want to start, Dr. McPhee, with the country's public debt. It's been an issue of concern. We've spoken about it for quite a while. 2 years back, we had the president in a roundtable in Mombasa speaking about the fact that our debt is sustainable compared us to Japan at the time. Fast forward to this year, we have a CS who is asking for another raising of the debt ceiling from 9 trillion to 12 trillion. What's your take on where we are going as far as public debt is concerned?
Well, you know, this is a concern not only here in Kenya, but it's a concern of many, many countries around the world. And I know I've watched TV shows. For example, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants has said to the American government, look, you know, we can't go on increasing our debt in this way. Now, one of the things that I think it's always important to keep in mind is that, you know, the public debt in Japan is over 200%. And ours is nearing 60% of GDP. Of our gross, you know, the value of goods and services produced in a year. You have to keep in mind that our monetary economy is very, very much smaller than our total GDP. Well, not very much smaller, but it's not as significantly big as it would be in a country like Japan or the US or even China. Now, on the one hand, you see, we are clamoring for infrastructure. And let's face it, you know, we have the Thika Superhighway. We're going to have the expressway going through the center of Nairobi. It's needed. We have the new works down in Mombasa. They're needed. And one of the problems here is that very often Mr. Average Kenyan will say, look, what is the government doing borrowing more while Mr. Average Kenyan is actually avoiding taxes? So, you know, we have to have that balance, I always feel, because I think it's so easy to exaggerate one side. And let's face it, I was reading an article in the newspaper the other day, so-and-so was fatally shot. And then in the very next paragraph, Mr. So-and-so lived to tell the tale. Now, you know, this is a little bit, you know, right, what our media are up to. They're clamoring there, you know, and it's not only here in Kenya, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the world. People are now, you know, people no longer shout, they yell, etc., etc. Right. All right. So, you know, I must say, I think one of the things that we've got to keep in mind is, number one, government must reduce its recurrent expenditure.
How does it do that?
Well, the first thing is we've got to start at the top. We've got to have people who lead by example. This is where we don't have this in Kenya. You know, all the time, the people in leadership in Kenya are not really leading. And so, you know, you see the point here really is our biggest item of expenditure now in our recurrent budget in Kenya is interest on our public debt. Now, the more that public debt increases, the higher that number is going to be. Now, you can't start promising more to the counties. You can't start employing more teachers at higher salaries if you are paying interest on debt. That's the problem I see. And, you know, let's face it, here in Kenya, you can earn, in the United States, you can earn 1% on long-term debt. Here in Kenya, you can earn 13%. So where do you want to put your money? So, you know, but you see, I feel that how do we change our parliament? How do we change our Senate? How do we change our executive?
Dr. Ari, the counter-argument to that from the leadership is that we are taking this debt, but we're taking this debt for development. So
I know.
You look at the SGR, you look at the infrastructure, the expressway that's about to go from the airport to Westlands. This is where the money is being channeled to. Do you think, as the conversation is going, we're getting value for our money? Is this
well, that's the first thing. That's the first thing. Are we getting value for money? And the problem probably is that we're not, because that cost will be inflated. And that happens even in the private sector in Kenya. And I can give you Nairobi Hospital. I read the whole article there, okay? And the people who actually were awarded the contract use the PO box and the telephone number of one of their competitors. And they made their name appear exactly the same as the other one. Right. And the contract was given to that particular contractor. So, but you see, that happens everywhere in Kenya. So, you know, the problem here, okay, is that one of the biggest problems you have in the mafia, for example, is that when a guy starts stealing from the mafia himself, what happens? You kill him. Right. And that happens in Kenya, okay? We have mysterious killings. Well, you know, why? Because maybe that person didn't actually pay that other person what was due to him. But so you see, we have to have a national change. But in order to have a national change, we've got to have a change at the top. A change for the better, you know, that I have got to be a person who can say, now, wait a moment, you've stolen this, and you cannot point your finger at me and say, you've also stolen. The moment that can happen, then we will start having a change in Kenya. But, you know, it's Magufuli is that, you know, let's face it, one of the things that he has done is he's reduced corruption in Tanzania, okay? And the other thing I have to point out at this stage is that I do not believe in democracy. And, you know, if you recently, the people in Kisii, the Gusii-led leader said, Matiang'i is our man. In Kajiado, they said, this is our man. That's the way we should have government in Kenya, not this stupid thing called democracy. It's just ruining the country, as it is ruining countries all over the world.
Dr. Ari, I want us to shift gears a bit, because there's a lot of gloom and doom on the onset on this conversation. I want us to just shift gears a bit and look at probably what's working. Well, where there might be light at the end of the tunnel economically this year.
Yeah.
What are you looking at?
Well, one thing I'm looking at actually is the oil price. If, you know, oil is now selling at $55 a barrel right at the moment, okay? It's just, and that's a few minutes ago, okay? You know, I got the oil price off the oil market. So now, the outlook is that with the COVID-19s, with the second lockdowns, there probably will be an oversupply of oil. Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, has really decided to cut back. Libya now is producing 1.2 million barrels a day. It's exporting more. So a number of the OPEC countries are actually exporting more. So, but I feel that just at this point last year, well, in February last year, we had a high in the oil market. It then went down to a negative number. Right. And this means that if, for example, you have a super tanker going across the Atlantic full of oil from Saudi Arabia, to get it, to offload it into the tanks in Houston, you actually have to pay the tanks in Houston to offload it. Now, there are a number of tankers actually just sitting in the middle of the ocean at the moment because we have an oversupply. Now, that's a good thing for Kenya. Why? Because oil is one of our principal imports. And so if we can keep that cost down, you have to keep in mind that when the Kenya shilling goes from 101 shillings, say, a year ago, to the 109, 110, that it's even been up at 114 and things like that on the actual market. But that means that imports are going to cost us more. So, for example, if you drive a car, refuel on the 14th of this month, because on the 15th you'll find the price of petrol higher, So, but it's just that oil was down at $49 a barrel. It's up at it's a bit of a high, really, at $55. It probably will not go any higher. It probably will go lower because they have these second lockdowns in Europe, and the amount of oil that they consume there is very much bigger than we consume. So it's likely that the oil price will be good for us. Okay. Now that's an important factor, because obviously when we buy, let's say we buy a barrel of oil, it would have been 5,500 shillings a year ago, but now if it's at $55, okay, you have to multiply that by 110, which is going to give you a higher number. So that's the first thing. But I tend to think that the price of oil is going to be subdued, I would say, for the rest of the year. And we need this at the top of industry in Kenya. And, in the banking industry, the competition is who's going to make the biggest profit. And I was talking to the chairman of one of the banks a number of years ago, must have been 10 years ago. He said, Jim, we're going to make 25 billion shillings profit before tax this year. And I asked him, I said, Peter, is this going to help Kenya? Is this going to assist Kenya? Because what you're doing is you're taking money out of the pockets of Kenyans and giving it to a small group of very rich people who pay tax at 5% on that dividend. There's a friend I have in Kisumu. If KCB pays a dividend of 3 shillings per share, he'll get a check. Well, he won't get a check because it's more than 1 million shillings, but he gets 240 million shillings, less withholding tax at 5%, 12 million. That's 228 million shillings after tax. Hii ni matundi ya uhuru. This is what happens. So the people who earn the most in Kenya actually pay tax at the lowest rate, 5%.
Dr. We have your predictions for this year. We're going to leave it at that.
Very good.
In December, hopefully, same place, same time, we shall sit right here and look back.
And if I'm not here, come and visit me in Langata Road Cemetery. You can sit in my grave and say, "Hey, McPhee, you were totally wrong."
Either way, we'll do it here. We'll do it here.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Okay.